Melissa, do you have to hop off right away, or do you have any like hate and bias updates or Office of Equity and Community Engagement updates to run by us real quick?
Yeah, thanks. So I unfortunately I don't have a lot of the hate and bias info. Juggling a lot right now, but I can share that there's still some reports coming in. I've been seeing those. Um, and I think right now our office is really focused on moving. We will be moving our offices from the LCC downtown building to the City Hall building by the riverfront by mid-June. And that's why most of our meetings until we're settled into our new place will be virtual only. I don't know if there's any questions. I'd be happy to answer any.
And are there any questions from our group members?
Yes, I do have a question. Julie Lambert, I'm with League, and on the agenda there comes to a certain portion where Richard and I are going to give updates. What I'd like to do is play a approximately 2 minute snippet that I think is very relevant to the group. So I wanted to know if I could have screen sharing privileges at that time.
And Julie, you are a panelist, so I think that you will be able to, but I will double check.
Yeah, I don't have security settings showing on my at the bottom of the screen.
Perhaps making her a co-host with that.
Yeah, I think maybe. I was also going to say, Julie, if you have like a link, you can send it in chat, and then if anything, I can try to screen share.
I can, but it has to be queued up to a certain place. And I think that would be harder than co-hosting me actually, because I've got the document all ready to play. Yeah, because it's part of a larger interview and we'd have to find the right place and everything all over again.
And Melissa, are you able to make her co-host?
Yes, let me do that right now. And it's
It's
Jolene,
Julie.
is that? Oh, Julie. Okay, Eugene.
And is there anyone who is currently attendee who is a work group member that needs to be moved to panelist?
This is Ann Milholland. I'm on the phone because my internet wouldn't work. So I'm a group member.
Perfect. I'll get you moved over to.
I don't think you can move just phone only or
Just a
audio
phone.
only, folks.
Okay.
Yeah, just I tried.
Okay, no worries. Anyone else on attendees?
Welcome,
All
Scott.
right.
And then Jolene, I just want to confirm, did you have sharing access now?
Let me try real quick. Share
Okay.
screen and yeah, it looks like I can do it now. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Yeah, no
You
problem.
may be able to hear me now. Hello, my name is Scott.
Hi, Scott.
Oh, hi. Honestly, I'm just kind of tuning in, curious about the topic of conversation with tonight's meeting.
Excellent. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Did you have any other updates for us, Melissa?
Nope, not any, not no. And if there's any other questions, I'm still here though.
Okay, perfect. We can move into public comment. If any of our participants, public comment is limited to 3 minutes. If you want to do like a quick introduction and what brought you here tonight, or if you have anything in general that you want to bring up for us, now is that time. So if you're able to raise a hand, or you can just speak up and I'll pay attention to the queue, but don't feel obligated to speak. But if you do have anything, please feel free. All right. Julie and Richard, I will pass it along to you for any league updates.
Okay, Richard, do you want to go first? Or not. He was having trouble getting into the meeting and
I'm here now. Every time I turn around, it's a damn pop-up. I can't stand it anymore. All right. League updates. Well, we're moving along with our work plan so far, including doing some of the similar things that are being proposed here, like bathroom access and other things. We're also working on the uh, uh, application process for being in respite centers and things like that, and the screening process for those things that leaves a lot of people discarded. So we're looking into that as well. And we're also looking to have guests. And I would propose that this group do the same, in that we can get more answers by having people who are actually in those areas, such as the guy that unlocks the doors for the bathrooms. He would make a great guest. I understand he's not very favorable to the unhoused, but he would make a great guest. So I don't know. Is there anything I'm missing, Julie?
no, that sounds about right. We're just continuing on with our work plan as well as things as they do come up.
And Julie, did you want to share your interview?
Yeah, sure. Blake, did you want to say something first?
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just not a panelist.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm Julie Lambert, and I've been a member of this work group for quite some time, several years, and I've been fortunate to be involved with League as well. And one of the things that we try to do is keep our ear to the ground and hear about things in real time. And in addition to that, Richard and I both work at KEPW, and we try to shed a light on different social justice issues that are happening within our community. And this last week, I had the privilege to interview Jetty Eddy. She's here tonight, and she gives a firsthand account. It's brief, but it indicates that what we think is happening out there is not necessarily happening. And it's just a short snippet, but I thought it was very powerful, and I wanted folks to know about what's going on. So let's see if I've never tried to do this with an audio before, so let's see if I can do it.
With Julie, and we have a fabulous interview for you. So I'm going to let Julie start us off. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Jana. I'm Julie Lambert, and I'm here with Jetty Eddy, and she's a local humanitarian, self-described, and she's much more than that. So, Jetty, how would you describe yourself and what you do for our community?
I would say that I'm hardcore when it comes to fighting for whatever it may be I'm fighting for at the time. Currently, it is for unhoused people living obviously outside. And right now, I've just been saying I'm a megaphone for those people. So
Where to start? How about your recent court case that you are still involved in? Would you like to explain what were the circumstances? Why are you even facing court at this point? Because you were just trying to help. So could you tell our audience how that even happened?
So I've been going out to camps here in Eugene since we'll say June. But in January 9th, I was out visiting a camp and checking in on this particular camp is full of elder people and disabled people. And I wanted to make sure that they would be ready for the ice storm that we all experienced in January. So on January 9th, I went out to go make sure people had what they needed and they were going to be ready as far as like being warm, understanding what was coming, and that kind of stuff. And I found one of my friends who is a 73-year-old. Oh, shoot. Sorry, guys. Did that screw that up?
Nope.
Okay. She's a 73-year-old, and I found her underneath a few tarps. That day it had been raining really heavily. It was pretty cold. And by the time she popped up, her tent had collapsed. And so she was laying in her tent under tarps that was all collapsed, covered in rainwater, and she had blue lips, and she was so cold. And I said, are you so cold? And she said, yeah, how did you know that I was cold? And I just looked at her and I said, you're not going to bed like this tonight. I'm going to go home. I went to my house and grabbed my personal sleeping bag, my tent, any extra blankets I could find, a bunch of my sweats. And I went back and we took her old tent and pulled it aside and set up a new one and got her blankets and got her into warm clothes. And I was there till about 11:30 that night. So I woke up, went back out there on January 10th just to see how her night went, make sure she was warmer, bring out some green propane cans and some garbage bags. And by the time I'd gotten there and visited the first person, I went to go to the next camp and I walk out and there's EPD. And being an advocate, I immediately was like, I got to record this and go see what's going on. So I pulled out my phone and I started walking towards them and they were like, come and sit on the tracks. And I was like, I'm not sitting on your tracks. Oh, what's the rule of swearing on this?
The rules of swearing, yes, could we go over those?
Yeah, profanity is not allowed on the radio, but I do know how to edit it out if necessary. So no
Okay.
worries.
I will do my best, but no promises that it won't happen. So
You can use euphemisms.
So I was like, I'm not freaking sitting on the tracks. It's crazy. And I said, I'll stand next to them. Then they ended up ticketing myself along with 9 other people that day. They also went into the 73-year-old's tent and ticketed her. And then they proceeded to cut people's tarps. They broke in somebody's window. They took off a door of a house. They grabbed a generator and tried to drain it of the oil, turned it on its side, and like removed the oil lid. The day, like this is literally the day the ice storm really started, and they did all that. So I told everyone to leave. Yeah, and so after that, it was like, okay, now I am fueled with rage. Let's fight, and it's just been this kind of crazy battle
So
ever since that day.
what year did that happen?
That was this year, 20.
Okay, I think that's probably enough for you to get the gist of it. Basically, she was out there trying to help, and this is the kind of response that she got. And one of the things that she said was that they were taking things that they had either decided were dirty or wet, and they were discarding those rather than keeping them for people. And certainly, cutting up people's tarps is not what I understand EPD has to do. So that's why I thought it was important to bring this, because that's a first-hand account. So thank you, Jetty. Thank you for coming here this evening, and thank you for standing up for people.
Richard, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted that to be brought up myself. Julie and I were talking before the meeting. That needs to be brought up because there's no ordinance that says if your stuff is dirty or wet, it gets thrown away. There's nothing about this. This is all outside of what we're doing here. And so we can propose all the policy changes and all of that we want to until we're blue in the face. And then this stuff happens. And it has nothing to do with any ordinance. It's just a judgment by the officer on the tracks or wherever they're at the time. And this is beyond ridiculous because, if this is Oregon, when is your stuff not wet or dirty, especially if you live outside? I yield.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So Julie, looking at this conversation that you had with Jetty, and I noticed, Jetty, that you're on here, and Do you have any comment or items that our work group could support with as you are doing your street outreach and activism in this area? Ways that our work group and league might be able to surround you or support?
I mean, thank you for having me and thank you for talking about it, because this is definitely an issue that is just mind blowing to me. As far as like support goes, I mean, there's always the need of support, you know, people getting their things swept by the police or contractors. Like, we try to make it out there and try to help people get their things out as best we can, but it's like it's always a battle, and there's always they're always threatening us like with arrest. So just having people show up and help hold them accountable for that stuff is really important. The camp that I was talking about in that clip is called, we call it the Seneca camp. It's on the railroad tracks, which, you know, opens the whole thing of this is federal property. But this camp has been diagnosed with an outbreak of scabies. And from what I understand, HIV Alliance and Black Thistle have been trying to go out and get them treated. And during this time, they were told to stay in place. And like Kelly McIver was apparently like on board with this. The health department was like involved in this. And so like the people out at that camp were told to stay in place by healthcare workers, but then EPD keeps coming and telling them they have to leave. This is a huge community. Like, the community should be like alerted and like alarmed and aware of this, because as soon as that camp of over 50 something people gets swept with scabies, what's that going to do to our community, right? Like, where are they supposed to go? I've called shelters. They don't give us anywhere for them to go. Like, I call and say I have scabies and I have 3 cats, and they're like, well, we can't take you with scabies and that's too many animals. So there's like nowhere for these people to go. And it's just like, no one will just like have clear communication. It's like we could put them somewhere, we could move them somewhere, we could help them have these supplies so they're not going out and spreading this disease to the community, but like no one will just communicate like adults. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Richard, I see your hand.
Sorry, that was still up from last time. Pardon that.
No problem, Richard. Julie and Jolene. Oh, Julie, I think your hand went down. Jolene?
I just wanted to acknowledge and center that, you know, as someone who works at the HIV Alliance and who works alongside our HFSO team for street outreach, that does track and sound like what I've heard from Oak Supportive Housing when I collaborate with this group. And that is, there is police presence where staff have mentioned that they're concerned, you know, about when they go out, you know, how they're going to be treated by EPD, and then also with the public health crisis and lack of communication, you know, that is definitely something that happens between service providers, is there's not enough clear, concise, accessible communication.
Thank you, Jolene. Does anyone else have any feedback or remarks for Jetty? Julie?
Yeah, thanks. I was having trouble getting my hand up. What I would like to know is, how can we track this? I mean, based on what she was saying, the police were not disposing of the property appropriately. And I don't know what kind of checks and balances that we have in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, or even if we do have any, or if it can be just, you know, the officer, you know, just put any uniform on them, whoever's in charge, just saying, in my opinion, this is dirty or wet, therefore we're not going to store it for you. And then people lose even more of their belongings. And this, it just keeps happening. I mean, we're still having the same conversation. We've talked about this for at least 5 years about proper property disposal, and people and as she was saying, it was on the day of the ice freeze. I mean, that's just, I think we've lost our humanitarian aspect, to say the least. That's an understatement.
Thank you, Julie. Richard, I see your hand.
Yes, that's a new hand. In the Ninth Circuit Court's ruling of Van versus Los Angeles, the edict, the ruling was that you just can't take people's stuff. That's what it's supposed to be. That's what the ordinance says. Will hold your stuff for 30 days. Doesn't say unless it's dirty or wet. It doesn't say in the ruling anything about that. So just like the ignoring Martin versus Boise, they're ignoring the Van versus Los Angeles ruling, and I'm not sure how we get them to comply. This body needs to get the police to be held accountable and comply with these things. We have a shelter finder now, and they need to be using that if they're going to start, quote unquote, relocating people, especially if they're going to take all their stuff. So this body needs to do something. It's time to get beyond just the policies here and do something about this. This is what's happening on the ground is different than what our necessarily our focus, which is great. This group focuses on a lot of good things, has done a lot of good things, but we're not focusing on what's happening on the ground. And that's different than our policy discussions. I yield.
Julian?
I didn't know if this group has ever consulted the civilian review board with the police department.
I can speak to that. Commissioner Merrick, who was on this body, served in the Civilian Review Board and has done some liaisoning in the past.
Okay.
And then since her departure, I've made some connections with folks who are current members of the Civilian Review Board, and they're open to us sending over information or incidents for them to review, as well as the police auditor's office. So this is something that could be referred to those bodies or that third-party agency.
If there's a way we can start, is it, or we might already have it, because I know you're doing a lot of things, Blake, but like some sort of document or Excel spreadsheet where we're sourcing the things, you know, and kind of tracking the types of incidents that are occurring.
We don't have a centralized database, but we take reports and refer them to different folks at the city. So right now, you know, our primary partner is the Office of Equity and Community Engagement. So our equity analyst is typically our liaison. So that's been Dre Charles for majority of the year, as Melissa Carino currently. But we can make independent referrals to the police auditor's office. So if we took this concern expressed by Jetty and, you know, there was a formal, like this is kind of a process of formally identifying this humanitarian issue, we can take that incident report and forward that information to the police auditor's office for review, while at the same time communicating with the civilian review board that this is probably a circumstance that needs to be on their radar. And that, I think that's two places we can start. The police commission is also open to us exchanging information with them. And we could coordinate with their chair if this is something that needs to be on the police commission's radar as well. So those are three bodies or, you know, other groups at the, you know, both public and staff groups that could provide support for this. And I'm not sure, Jetty, if you've reached out to any of those bodies. I know that you've been active on social media and within the media, but those are currently the resources I know. So, but if you have any ideas, Jillian, I'll give the mic back to you, and then we can see what Jetty has done on the internal reporting side.
Oh, no worries. I know that for unhoused folks who have pets, you know, because I know that pets are mentioned, getting into shelter like the River Road Navigation Center. If anyone has tried to put someone into that center lately, they understand how hard it is to get an open bed because there are no open beds. So like we have the online referral platform, but we don't have enough resources for folks who do need like a pet dorm or some sort of shelter that would accept pets. And even then, there comes the question with vaccination requirements, companion animal versus service animal, as well as like pets that are unneutered or not spayed. So, more to be revealed there, and more work to be done in those areas. But yeah, thank you, Blake.
Absolutely, Jolene. It's a truly a scarce resource, and I think this comes back to a conversation that we've had with our most recent recommendation that went through the Human Rights Commission around the unsanctioned camping protocols, which I think is exceptionally pertinent to this example provided to us. So I'll speak to that a little bit, but Jetty, I want to recognize your hand before I share that and show you a little bit of what we've worked on within this arena during this year. So I recognize your hand, Jetty.
So I've actually filed a complaint with the police auditor April 8th, and it was reviewed and classified as an inquiry. And then I got a phone call from one of the sergeants and let him had a conversation with him. And then on April 8th, on April 26th, I got a thing saying that my complaint was made against the employee of the City of Eugene Police Department was reviewed by the auditor and classified as an inquiry and moved on to the sergeant. And based on the information he received, the complaint is now closed, and that's all the information I have. So we have been filing complaints with the police auditors, and nothing's happened.
Yeah, thank you for that context on your reporting. Did they provide information as to why the complaint was closed or any sort of context on the situation?
No, and I've emailed them and asked them what was the outcome? Why was it not found as anything that should be moved forward with? And I've never gotten a response back. So
okay. Well, thank you for that information. If you would like to pass along any information regarding that complaint or that conversation, like incident report numbers and those component, that's something that we could take through the Human Rights Commission and liaison to the Police Commission to see if there can be a conversation happening within the public bodies, and try to bring it out of that. Come at it at that angle. If that's information that you'd be willing to forward along to us, I could share our contact information to forward that.
yeah, I would absolutely do that. And like I said, I attend a lot of sweeps. I have a lot of video footage. I have proof that the cops they don't really give out any resource sheets. I finally had to really go off on Officer Stramler and be like, yo, you can't just keep coming in here and telling people to leave and not giving them any resources. And from what I understood, there was that app that you guys are talking about, they're supposed to be checking. They don't ever talk about it. So yeah, I could get you guys a lot of footage and information on that stuff.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so that part of what our body can do when we get this type of information is one, we can follow up with our own inquiries that echo the sentiments shared in complaints or inquiries. And we can also look at what information is provided and make recommendations around the feedback that we receive. So if we can monitor for trends of different questionable behaviors or things that you're observing, we can make recommendations about what those interactions should look like or what type of resources should be distributed. And that's well within our purview at this group. So anything you can send along, I think will be helpful. And I'll call on Richard's hand, and then I'm going to actually share a screen so you can see a little bit of what we've worked on and try to push through to City Council this year. to actually have this conversation about the conduct that's happening in camp clearance in the community. So Richard, I'm going to call on your hand, and then I'm going to pull up and we'll share screen after your comment.
Well, I think, Blake, we should help Jetty put forth a real complaint to the police auditor and who else you've mentioned, as well as anyone else you've mentioned. I'm exasperated because this has been going on since before I was homeless. So this is an ongoing thing. What happens on the ground is much different than things that are being looked upon in these committee meetings and the other committee meetings I serve on in League and other things. We do have some unhoused members in League now, which this body should look at having as well if possible. But we should help her by citing the rulings that have to do with this, like I'm saying, Van versus Los Angeles and the Ninth Circuit Court rulings and other things that should make it clear that we have a shelter finder and they should be using it, and we should be is like I say, this is exasperating because when we brought up the shelter finder in the coordinated entry committee meetings, even the police were all for it. Now they're not using it. They're just telling people again to leave. We're decades behind where we need to be. And I think we should help at least forward a complaint to the police auditor and the other committees. At least this, I am so exasperated with all this. I'm sorry. I'll yield.
No, thank you, Richard. Yeah, and I think that that's something that our body can steward and follow up on those. When I'm looking at this, Jetty, I want to share with you a document that our work group produced earlier this year due to a correspondence that occurred in November of 2023, so about 2 months before the ice storm. And some there were some concerns expressed by members of our outreach and sheltering community that interact with our folks that are unsheltered, and a lot of concerns around camp clearance in the fall of 2023 leading up to this event. And I just want to share some of our recommendations that we're putting through that we currently haven't seen any action on or discussion on within City Council. But this document that I'm sharing right now has been approved by the Human Rights Commission, and we have asked City Council to review the recommendations around expanding the unsanctioned protocols. So the protocols for posting folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness during hazardous weather events, as well as some pretty explicit guidelines on what we think would be an approach for asking folks to vacate or clear an encampment under these protocols. And we've really brought in and highlighted the human rights concerns with the current practice. And I just want this to be on your radar, and I'll forward this to you after the meeting so you can take a look at this and kind of see what we've produced and been working on. But one of the pieces that I think really sticks out based off what you've provided is in this document, we highlighted the comments and concerns expressed by multiple directors of outreach organizations from Black Thistle Street Aid, our HIV Alliance, CORE, Daisy Chain, Carry It Forward. We're seeing many providers who are doing the street outreach describing the current practices and manner of doing so as being violent and being a clear disregard for human rights. And acting on that, our work group put together these recommendations and identified that, in this statement, the work group members agreed that the clearance of encampments during hazardous weather events poses a threat to human life and may compromise the city's ability to uphold Article 3 Article 5, Article 7, Article 17, and Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as indexing various policies that Richard's discussed. So we are in alignment with the reality that the practices that we're seeing, especially with camp clearance in our community and some of these major clearance events, are compromising the city's ability to maintain its status as a human rights city. Definitely it's creating a humanitarian issue and a humanitarian crisis for our unhoused populations that I think folks that work in this sector can observe and recognize in their day-to-day work in the field out in our community. Scrolling down, I wanted to show you these recommendations for the expansion of these hazardous weather conditions. So this is on your radar. And then I also want to talk a little bit about some of the protocol recommendations that we made around unsanctioned camping posting. And a couple of these components really came to mind as you were expressing what you observed in the field. And I want to demonstrate our alignment in those observations and just read through a couple of these so that you understand what we as not only this work group, but what the Human Rights Commission has actually asked City Council to consider as of 2024. So we've asked that outreach providers and municipal staff do due diligence to verify that shelter alternatives identified are open for business and available to conduct intakes into their shelter programs. That outreach providers and municipal staff should do due diligence to verify that the shelter alternatives identified offer services that meet demographic criteria and composition of the household. Outreach providers and municipal staff should do due diligence to verify that individuals do not have temporary bans, permanent bans, or other measures inhibiting their household's ability to access shelter alternatives identified. Outreach providers and municipal staff should do due diligence to verify that individuals do not have any circumstances inhibiting an individual's ability to access shelter alternatives identified, including but not exclusive to variables such as safety concerns, privacy concerns, or other concerns associated with their protected class statuses, and that outreach providers and municipal staff should arrange transportation assistance within a reasonable time frame. And if they can't meet these criteria, we have decided as a group that any form of clearance is not advised during hazardous weather, and these conditions may pose a threat to the safety, health, and well-being of the individual who may be camping or establishing a campsite as an act of survival. So in that circumstance, our group has decided the action may compromise the City of Eugene's ability to uphold articles outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I just wanted to read through that, and for us as a group to recognize on what we have recommended and asked City Council to consider about the current practices, and that we have this agreed upon set of recommendations that we've currently seen no conversation and no action about at a municipal level upon an acknowledgement that there was a comparative analysis done between the current protocol and that this recommendation would be sent forward in a City Council packet. But we've seen no discussion on a policy level and no amendments to the protocols. And this was a recommendation approved by the City of Eugene's Human Rights Commission. So we share your concerns and we're currently advocating for updates in this space. And I want you to know and have this document so that you can take a look at it during your advocacy efforts and just know that we're in alignment with those concerns. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I just wanted to share that with you so that you knew that this is something that we're also looking at and talking about here. So I'm glad you're here this evening to talk to us. So Richard and Jackie, I see your hands. I don't know who gets to go first. So I'll open the floor to Richard. It looks like it's yours.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Are you sure, Richard? I just have one quick question.
Go ahead.
Blake, do you know when city council breaks for the summer? Because I worry that to not have discussion about our proposal before like extreme heat, before potential fire season and wildfire smoke conditions, that I want to make sure that it's on their radar with that coming up and approaching so quickly. So do you know if there's a way that they would be discussing that before they break? Can we push for them to discuss it before they break?
Yeah, I want to be really transparent as I wanted this discussion to happen before the end of winter. And for a work session to be held around this. And I know that there are folks in council that wanted to have this discussion before the end of winter. When it went through the Human Rights Commission, it was not processed and delivered to council for quite a while. I don't know the exact period, but it was it really should have already gone to city council. And I do too share that fear that this recommendation isn't being taken seriously or into consideration by our current body. So our follow-up there, Jackie, to answer that question could be asking for dialogue with City Council. Councilor Leach has been a really active advocate for unhoused populations, and I think would be that liaison for the commission to ask when this discussion is happening, or recommend that it goes to a work session. But I don't have any idea when that timeline will occur, other than us being able to have that conversation at our upcoming commission meeting.
I think if it's not able to take place before summer break, that we really do our due diligence as a work group to make sure that when we hear or see or experience any of these things happening, that we keep track of it so that then we can really push it when they're back in session and say, hey, this is what occurred during the summer, and we're seeing that it's a continuous trend. So I just want to put that out there for the group to consider.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Richard?
All right, you got that right up, and it almost ignored, it sounds like, by the higher HRC, and whether it was delivered to city council yet or not, apparently we don't know. If it was, it's not being considered. So I suggest an addendum that should get their eyes open. The police are violating the law. Period. The law. The police are violating Van versus Los Angeles. They're violating Martin versus Boise. Excuse me. I have somewhat impacted by the pollen these days. Excuse me. But they're violating the law, and they're not using the shelter finder to find anybody that they're so-called relocating. So they are violating the law. Maybe that should be an addendum to this document, because we're apparently getting nobody's attention, and it's time we do. I yield.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And looking at that, knowing that this is something that's been recommended by the Human Rights Commission, so it was reviewed at a commission meeting and passed along. Yeah, I think a follow-up is warranted, and a discussion about this on a legal level is definitely warranted. So what I'm hearing tonight, and with Jackie, kind of leading that dialogue, is I think that this is something that we should include in our upcoming Human Rights Commission meeting to discuss what this follow-up looks like, and really determine what is our best pathway forward to make sure that this recommendation is heard before we see extreme weather events of the summer. And what types of addendums that we might need to make to actually push it through, and make sure that it gets a work session. or that those considerations, those recommendations are taken seriously by folks that have the ability to adapt internal protocols at the city. And Richard, I see your hand.
I do have one more thing to add. Like I said, yes, to this panel, to this body would help. Maybe we could get some of the or more than one mayoral candidate to sit before us, so we can throw this at them, or anybody else that's running for office, city council, Ward 1, any of these people. This is the new blood coming in. Maybe we can get somewhere by having them listen to us, not just send documents their way eventually. I yield.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So I think one of the things that we could do for that, especially looking at the HRC, is that we have a quarterly meeting with the city manager and the mayor. That the Human Rights Commission is afforded about an hour of time to discuss ongoing issues. And one of the components that was recommended by the mayor was that if inquiries or recommendations are not being followed up on, that we bring it to that meeting and actually discuss it at that level with the mayor and the city manager. So I'm inclined to actually bring this recommendation to that quarterly meeting with the mayor, which happens once a quarter, and to really follow up and determine where this is living within the city right now. And if council is the appropriate audience for this, or if city management is the appropriate audience for this. So I think there's a lot of discussion to be had around this. And I just want to echo those sentiments. And, Jetty, I appreciate you coming here and providing your testimony and really adding a lot to our conversation, not only around league updates, but our follow up on this unsanctioned posting process. So I'll look forward to emails and communication from you regarding the complaints that you filed so that we can follow up on a commission level and see where those complaints went and how they were received and by whom. So I appreciate you being here and having this discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
So folks, looking at our agenda this evening, I think we have some clear action items around that conversation. And Julie and Richard, I appreciate you bringing in that lens. I'm so happy that we have our league updates as a component of this meeting. I think it provides, it always stimulates a very productive dialogue early on. And the fact that you're inviting folks to participate is just wonderful. So thank you. Looking at our next step on the agenda, if we're ready to move into that, are we across the room? Do we feel ready to move into our next item on the agenda for this evening? Thumbs up. Not seeing any thumbs up. I saw one thumbs up. Julie, I see a hand. Is that I'm ready for the next item?
I can't find a thumbs up on my thing.
Okay.
It just says raise hand, and that's it. That's the only option I have.
Well, next
no
time
thumbs.
I'll ask for high fives instead of thumbs up. How about that?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for letting me know, Julie. Okay. So our next item that we had here does actually really echo sentiments discussed in our previous conversation. And this is a request to have a discussion around Grants Pass versus Johnson, potential outcomes and implications. So for folks that have observed that that case at the federal level, how are we feeling about this? What has been our experience observing the dialogue about Grants Pass, Johnson versus Grants Pass? Has everyone had an opportunity to tune in and see a little bit about that case? Richard, I see a hand. I'll let you start our conversation off.
All right. Well, thank you. I did hear arguments on both sides, and from what I heard, the justices were very disgusted by the policy of grants pass, in that you can't lie down with a blanket or you're gonna get a citation. And if you're homeless, pretty much in grants pass, you get a citation. Um, it's almost the same here, but not quite as bad. And so they were harping on the attorney for grants pass, on how that's possible and what is going on with that. And the attorney pleaded that such laws by the Ninth Circuit Court, such as Martin versus Boise, especially, needed to be overturned so that they could, quote, manage their homeless population there in Grants Pass. Excuse me. Mind you, it was the opinion of members of the city council there in Grants Pass, and the mayor as well, that they didn't really want any homeless in Grants Pass, period. And they weren't going to do anything to help them, including shelter or anything else. And if they just left, that would be good. That was the idea behind the ordinances, and the justices picked up on that. But they also were intrigued by the idea that you can't just have anybody set up tent and set up camp just anywhere and for any reason at any place at any time. So the decision will be coming in June. And with all that said, I don't know exactly how the justices are going to rule, being that there are over 650,000 at a conservative estimate of homeless people in this country. And I'll let it go at that.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think looking at the discussion and dialogue, it's really stringing a tune to what we discuss in this work group on a monthly basis. And I know what a lot of us are doing in our own advocacy and conversations around our crisis of housing and homelessness in the city of Eugene. Grants Pass, I think one of the unique distinctions is this conversation surrounding an individual's ability to not only exist within the city's park spaces for just simply lying with a blanket. There's a lot of conversation around how do you determine someone is unhoused, and does the defense in this conversation recognize housing status as a discrete social group? And so I think that there are two components to the case that really strike a chord with us. Is some of the conversation is really about housing status or unhoused status as a discrete social group, which is something I know that we have currently had a lot of discussion about as we think about making recommendations surrounding unhoused status or housing status being a protected class in all frameworks. And when we look at this policy, I think one of the biggest things that we're observing is that there's a distinct regulation of individuals within a certain social status without any clear guidance on how you might determine whether someone is laying in a park just to enjoy an afternoon, or laying in a park because they're unhoused and seeking respite. And I think that conversation really does strike the chord of discrimination against a specific social group. And that was one observation I really had during these watching and listening to the discussion around this, is that I think at the Supreme Court level, there is conversation. I think the other component that has come up, Richard, which you referenced a lot, is that I believe in that community there are only 100 shelter beds available, and one service provider that they are available at. There was reference to their local shelter provider not being accessible, either due to those adequate shelter alternatives as far as capacity goes, but also the type of programming available. And I just wanted to, recognize that this is in the state of Oregon. These are practices that are common. And I think every time that I heard grants pass in that dialogue, I could not help but immediately reference, practices within the city of Eugene and things that we've been discussing. So it's really been hitting home, and I'm interested to see those decisions. So I appreciate you opening up that conversation, Richard. Those are items that I've been thinking about, and I'd love to hear what other folks are thinking about, and then how we want to approach the observation of this conversation as a work group. Jolene, I saw your hand come up, so I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Yeah. So yeah, social class status, in our community. So like even things like riding a bicycle. So when you think about someone riding a bicycle, if they look unhoused, then they receive more bias than someone who may be observed or seen or perceived as riding a bicycle for health reasons. And so I think it's fascinating how we see folks doing the same activity, but there is a different story attached to that activity. But for the Supreme Court decision, so if this goes through and we're adding more criminalization of unhoused folks in the community, that's going to have an impact on our carceral system. People are often fined and they can't pay for the fines. Once they come out of prison, they're less likely going to be able to find employment. They have housing barriers, and we don't have enough housing supports to be able, like in place right now, to be able to provide those rapid rehousing supports once they get out. So I'm just hoping that the work group can keep that in mind as well, as far as long-term impacts.
Yeah, absolutely, Jolene. And I think that this, our conversation with Lori, going through the persecution of the unhoused report that was produced, I think one of the things that really stuck out was that section where we talked about implications, and what does this mean either way, depending on how this court decision turns out. What does that mean on a local level? And I think one of the biggest concerns is moving that needle towards us really examining whether our nation can view citing someone, finding someone who doesn't have economic resources, who is existing in poverty and is unhoused, if that is a violation of our constitutional rights. I think that this is something that we have to be really aware that if this changes on a federal level, what do we do at a local level to maintain protections or build more inclusive frameworks, even if that's not being recognized at the national level? And I think it's something that we really need to consider, our ability to influence code and provide recommendations that could stand in the City of Eugene code, because we still have that autonomy as a city to decide what precedents do we build upon. And Jillian, I see your hand.
Yeah, sorry about that. You're right, because we have our constitutional framework of our rights, and that is the baseline. So cities can add protections to that, but they cannot take away from that. So there is an opportunity locally for leadership to add protections and to, add those things. So just wanted to put that in there. And I see Richard too with his hand.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion. Thank you, Jolene, of the Eighth Amendment in this arguments back and forth, and that it has to do with cruel and unusual punishment and so forth. So I was happy to hear that expressed in there. But what wasn't expressed and should have been expressed is, number one, the shelter finder idea is new. It's not just here, it's in Seattle, it's in a few other places in the country. In fact, ours was based on somewhere in the middle of the country that has the shelter finder, but I wish that would have been brought to the court's attention in their in the arguments. And also, what was not brought to their attention, and I keep saying this over and over and over again, we are doing the same type of dealing with the homeless as far as municipalities as in the time of the hobos. It hasn't worked. It doesn't work. In fact, the entire population of the unhoused is increased tenfold since then. We're not doing anybody any favors at all. And we're making things worse by calling them they and them, and making them into their own class that they don't want, rather than a respected class. So well, this is failing on all fronts. And if the court decides in Grant's past favor, then I don't know exactly what we're going to do, because they're already getting around the laws and enforcing and being held accountable to the laws that have and rulings that have already been around. And now this, I feel encouraged by the arguments that were brought, but I am not, I don't know about this particular court full of right-wing people there. I yield.
Yeah, thank you, Jolene, and thank you, Richard. I think as we approach this and we observe the dialogues and the decisions made, I think one thing that we can do as a group is listen to the counter arguments, listen to the discussion being held by both sides to understand both sides of this issue in a way that helps us do our advocacy and make recommendations. I think that the Supreme Court justices are going to be asking questions that, if you listen to the deliberation, are largely going unanswered. And I think that we can actually echo and amplify those questions from this framework as a public body, and to start asking those questions internally, and to start asking those questions from our political leaders in the city of Eugene. Um, you know, some of the deliberation really left a lot of room for discussion. And although the defense is really just providing a lens into the way that municipalities are thinking about their management of unhoused people residing within their jurisdictions. And I think there's a lot to be gleaned from that observation, and for us to make recommendations that address those concerns and humanize this issue, to realize that, just like you said, Richard, is this is an experience, and folks that are experiencing homelessness, they're not a crisis to be managed. They're individuals that need support and they need humanitarian relief. And I think if we really want to talk about promoting human rights at a city level, we have to be really honest about this crisis, that it's a humanitarian crisis. And it's a crisis. It's not about managing a crisis. It's about supporting individuals who are living in a society that has barriers to housing and has barriers to accessing services. And what is our role? What is a city's role in making sure that its citizens are housed and supportive and have access to services? And how are we prioritizing resources to make sure that people are taken care of? Those are the questions that I dwell on and that I ruminate after listening to this deliberation. And Jillian, I see your hand.
I agree, Blake. So for some folks who, because on our team we think about like long-term housing stability. So stabilize the immediate needs like shelter, then add in the supports for long-term housing stability. That's the end goal. And for chronically unhoused individuals, we do refer them to do a front door assessment because we're not a provider with HMIS. So we have to refer and have someone else do it. Some folks would have a higher chance of success at being at a permanent supportive housing unit like MLK, MLK Commons. And what's frustrating and what we're finding on our team is that since the Sacred Heart University District Hospital shut down in downtown Eugene, the folks that would most benefit from permanent supportive housing, they're not able to get to the emergency rooms, to access the services, to become frequent flyers, to qualify and meet the criteria to be able to get considered, as people who are high utilizers of crisis systems, such as the jail and the hospital. And so we have pretty high metrics to meet, and not everyone is able to get themselves over to Springfield to reach an emergency room. LTD, I think, is also feeling the crunch with people using the LTD services as medical transport, to get to these facilities. So, like we have these gaping chasms in accessibility here that happen. And like my question is, who makes these criteria? Can they be changed? Are there decision makers or leaders who can alter the criteria to, better serve folks who can't access Riverbend or Mackenzie Willamette? So, but yeah, that's one gaping chasm that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jolene. Does anyone else have any thoughts or ideas related to this? Any other observations from their work in the community? Richard?
Well, I'm trying to find it here, but Portland just revised their entire camping ordinances in the city of Portland with a focus on those who refuse services, which is very interesting. Those who refuse services or refuse to go to shelter will be fined or jailed, depending on how many times, I guess, they do that. And that was something that got my attention right away. So implementing these ordinances, these guidelines, and this so forth and so on are not taking into the account of what people are going through. And I think Jetty might be a good person to start teaching how to do outreach. You are involved in outreach, Blake. Our coordinated entry is involved in outreach. I think outreach workers shouldn't go out there just because there's a reason to go out there. I think outreach workers should just go and have a sandwich and a Coke and a smile with people and see what happens. Just talk to people for a while. This is how we might get into averting some of the things that are going on out there that a lot of other people are not happy with, and maybe getting people that are unhoused to have somebody to talk to besides law enforcement just for a while, or longer. Jetty goes out there and camps with them. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see. I don't know. I did my time, so I can't do it anymore. But I'd like to see that for people who are equipped to do that. I'd like to see people spend time with the unhoused, so that they know that they're wanted, that they're needed, and they're spiritually fed a little bit. And I don't know if Jetty would want to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I feel that that is such a profound remark. And you know, a lot of the way that I think when we think about this is there is an individual impacted by each of these policy decisions. There are individuals with individual narratives and individual journeys that are living, you know, unsheltered in our community. And there's a plethora of reasons why and how someone ends up in that circumstance. And shifting this narrative away from enforcement towards outreach, from criminalization or, you know, violation of the law, to saying folks that need humanitarian support, um, is really important. It's really important that we understand that these are individuals and there's a million and one reasons why someone might need supportive frameworks. And shelter is just one piece of the puzzle. Housing is just one piece of the puzzle. Outreach is just one piece of the puzzle. And decisions in enforcement without protections of the discrete social group um, only exacerbate the conditions for us to help someone access shelter, housing, and those supportive services. Um, and yeah, it's deeply troubling that we have so many individuals that just need that acknowledgement of their existence, but instead their existence is constantly questioned and challenged and criminalized. But truly, it's recognition of their existence and their humanity that's at the key and the heart of the response that we need to have to do human rights work. And so I think observing this being discussed at a federal level only solidifies the reality of what a grave crisis we are at as a nation. That it's gotten to the point that we're having those discussions at a federal level and we're listening to the Supreme Court deliberate. I think that just a sobering thought and a sobering observation. I think our work group should be really vigilant and plugged into this in determining what we do with the results, either way it goes, you know, and how we learn from this as a case study, and how we adopt advocacy and policy frameworks as a result of those decisions. Um, so I appreciate the conversation around this tonight and everyone's thoughts that we're sharing. And yeah, so I have many things to say, but we can talk about this all evening. I know we can, probably even for days. But I think our work is not done, and there's a lot to be learned from this current dialogue. So, if anyone has any key takeaways or notes as they watch the deliberations or decisions, let's plan to put this on our docket this summer. And when those decisions come in June, let's have a discussion, a really intentional discussion about what we do with that, and see if there's anything we can do on a local level. Anyone else have anything that they'd like to share regarding this, the Supreme Court case, before we go on to our next agenda item? Okay, high fives around the room. We're ready to move on to the next one. Okay, I think I see a high five. Julie, do I got a high five from you? Thumbs up, I would ask.
Thumbs up, absolutely.
Thumbs up. Okay, beautiful, wonderful. Okay, so we have had a discussion about an ongoing discussion related to local code related to parking. We had a pretty intentional discussion with Councillor Leach at our recent meetings. And as we know, those of you probably know, those parking code amendments were passed. And we have some pretty substantial changes to parking policy in the city of Eugene, to which our work group decided has a disproportionate and disparate impact on unhoused populations residing in their vehicles or RVs. And I wanted to open the discussion around this and to kind of get people's take on the policy recommendations that were approved and what our next steps could be with these updates to the code, either from a policy level, from a programmatic level, or producing a statement about our thoughts surrounding the parking policy. So I wanted to open the floor with that discussion and see where we are all at with that conversation and what's currently going on within our city code. So someone else can get the ball rolling. And I can share those and if you want, I can share those code recommendations so we can take a look at them too. Richard, I can always count on you to get the ball rolling. How are you feeling about this?
Again, exasperated. Despite our conversations with Councilor Leach and inviting her to this meeting a couple of times, and despite everything that we have said and done and proposed, they passed it. We're going up against a brick wall every time we do these things. I don't understand why we're there. Apparently, we're not making our point when we make these proposals or have these discussions. It doesn't make any sense. And for all the good she did, Councilor Leach wouldn't comment during this meeting on anything that we proposed. And apparently she didn't vote in favor of it, but too many did. And we're in voting season, folks. So if you haven't filled out your ballot, it's time to know who's on the scorecard. And we have people who have been staunch advocates for the unhoused that voted for this, like Emily Simple and Matt Keating. And we never know where Matt Keating is coming from on any given day. And of course, we have the proposer of this amendment is Councilor Groves, who says, and I quote, that he wants to represent all of Eugene. And I beg to differ with the counselor there, because he doesn't want to represent all of Eugene. He wants to represent the voters and the taxpayers, and that doesn't include the unhoused by any means. That's what he is indicating there when he says that. And so it's time to know who you're voting for and what they did. And Emily Simple's on her way out. I would recommend, if you're voting and you haven't filled out your ballot yet, like me, it's time to get some fresh faces in the crowd here. I yield.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think looking at this, as we look at this, these codes, one of the components to these amendments, I think, is really us trying to understand where this is coming from, and I think that we've discussed where this is coming from. I mean, we discussed the explicit targeting of these policies impacting folks who are unhoused. And I think one of our pathways to acknowledging the impact of these recommendations, I think, is talking to folks who are living within their vehicles or are impacted by these policies, not only unhoused populations, but low-income renters, families, households. There's a lot of different populations that are going to be impacted by these policies. When we look through this, these are some really expensive fines. These are fines that can make someone not be able to buy groceries make someone not be able to pay their utility bill, not only lose their shelter if they're seeking shelter in it, but lose a vehicle that they might use for income. The amount of times that I have conversations with unhoused folks who are driving Uber, driving, gig jobs that require a vehicle. If someone loses their vehicle, which I know individuals who have lost their vehicle while experiencing homelessness, who have lost their jobs because their vehicles were taken. So, there are true disparities that not only impact someone's ability to seek shelter, but someone's ability to access economic opportunities, to be able to make it to medical appointments. I mean, we don't live in a society that is accessible for folks to not have a vehicle. Navigating our city without a vehicle can be really challenging. With updates to LTD's public safety, we are seeing folks who, in our shelter programs can't carry their laundry from, an access center to where they're living because it doesn't meet the size requirements. I mean, it's imperative for someone to have a vehicle or a service provider to do transportation around our city. And I think that this is really something that I would like our work group to provide a statement on. And to put it forward to the Human Rights Commission to pass along to council, to talk about how we engaged in the process. We liaisoned with Councillor Leach, who has been a huge advocate for the unhoused population and truly did everything she could to slow down and modify this recommendation. Just a fantastic steward, if I may say, for the Human Rights Commission in recognizing our concerns and passing them along. And we are still here, as you said, Richard. We have a policy. This policy has devastating impacts and the potential to cause more people to go unsheltered and to be in unsafe conditions and lose their access to economic opportunity. And when we look at this from a human rights perspective, Article 17 says everyone has the right to property alone as well as the association of others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of their property. When you don't have a place to park a vehicle and that's your only place for shelter, I do think that these impoundment measures challenge Article 17, especially if you're not providing a place for someone to exist otherwise. If you're not able to purchase a parking pass for a residential area because you don't technically have residency there, where are you supposed to sign up for a permit to park in this city if you don't have an apartment, if you don't have an address? There's nowhere for you to register to get a permit to legally park in a neighborhood if you don't have established residency in that neighborhood, in an apartment. But our unhoused populations are our neighbors. They live in these places. They live in these neighborhoods. Those are their homes. So I think that there's a blatant gap in the policy and the practices of the city that, again, does not allow unhoused populations to exist in the city of Eugene. And it's a huge oversight. And Richard, to your feedback you provided at a past meeting, what about the RV that's parked on the street, that grandma and grandpa are using to stay in while they're on vacation? Are they going to get a citation? What about the person who's a teen and going over to their friend's house for a movie that parks in front of the mailbox? Are they going to get a citation? What about the babysitter who's parking in a high density neighborhood to babysit someone's children? Are they going to get a citation? There's this question about what other populations are going to be impacted, and are they actually going to be impacted, or is it just going to impact members of the unhoused population? I think that's a really important question to ask, how the city will equitably roll out and implement this policy across all socioeconomic groups. And I don't see a way for that. So I'd like our work group to provide a statement about this and the concerns we have and push it to the commission, if you all would be interested in that. So I'm going to step back, and Richard, I see a hand, and then I want to hear people's thoughts on providing a statement. And if that's something that we want to put our energy into.
Absolutely, because this is targeting mostly people with RVs, and most of those RVs don't turn a turn of a key. They're going nowhere. They barely got to wherever they're going, and that's probably because they got towed there by the city. Now, it should be part of our statement that how much does that cost all the time to go tow a whole bunch of people in RVs from one spot 2 blocks away and move them all 2 blocks away? How much does that all cost? One thing about Lori Hobber's report that we didn't get into was the cost of all of this. And so criminalization of the unhoused costs a lot of money to implement and enforce. All those cops over there at the Seneca train tracks, Jetty, are getting paid a lot of money to go do all that crap. And so how much does it cost for the implementation and enforcement of these rules? And Jetty says she has information about all of this. So if I can, I'd like to refer it to her.
Thanks, Richard. So, Richard, during the meeting, we can't have a comment from the public until the end. So we can. One thing I think we should do is invite Jetty to join the work group, so Jetty can be an ongoing participant in this conversation. I just wanted to provide that clerical note.
Boo!
I know the droves of bureaucracy. I'm so sorry, but we can provide space for that comment at the end. Richard, I echo those sentiments on RV and camping components, and I'm happy to hear that you approve of us working on a statement and actually examining this cost structure and the accountability around that. So other folks, do we have, what's our thoughts on this? What are things that we would like to provide comment on if we are to produce a statement surrounding this? Jackie?
I think that it's important to include the impact for low income families or low income individuals as well. And again, just overall, it's creating barriers. It's not resolving anything for anybody. And so I think that if we can really highlight the reality of what the proposal or what the amendments will do, I think that that might, I don't know that it'll make an impact, but I think that it might be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Anyone else thoughts on producing a statement? Things we might want to share? Cynthia? I saw Cynthia's hand, and then I saw Anne's, and then Julie's.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I don't have a voice.
Oh, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I definitely think we should develop a statement as soon as possible, but I would like some clarification on the process for having that happen and where it goes next.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. So I think, to this question is we can produce a statement, put it forth the Human Rights Commission, and provide this to City Council either by written testimony or be prioritized for testimony at a City Council meeting.
That's great. Do we need a movement, a motion?
A motion from this group and then a motion from the commission if we want it to be on behalf of the commission.
Okay.
Anne, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just want to support this idea too. We shouldn't just sit by and let this travesty happen. They need the feedback that we can provide.
Thank you, Anne. Happy to hear that support. Julie?
Yes, thank you, Blake. I really liked what was said earlier about providing a cost analysis of this, and I'm not really privy to the inner workings of the city and how they calculate things, etc. But I would imagine that if we were able to give them dollar figures about how much this is actually costing, whereas this was pointed out earlier, is really not benefiting the people that we're trying to work with. So I mean, money talks. If they see how much money that they're spending on something that's just putting a Band-Aid on something, I think it might make a difference because they do care about money.
Richard?
Yeah, in that again, a business owner of a tow company wondered what the hell we're doing, towing people 2 blocks away and putting them over there, and then coming back a day later or 2 days later and towing them back over there. And exactly how is that getting rid of the homeless problem? The cost analysis of this should affect taxpayers, and I don't know if they want to pay the taxes to shuffle people from 2 blocks away and then do it again a day or two later and then come back and do it again a day or two later. These vehicles are not going to move by themselves, most of them. So exactly what are we doing? This is not logical. This doesn't make any sense what this is. This ordinance is just to impede the lives of those who are unhoused some more. It's just to make their lives miserable some more. And I don't see exactly what it's going to, do, except maybe affect the driveway of a business eventually. I yield.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. But I think looking at this, and there are two components, following up on the cost and then following up on what was voiced by the public. As public officials, as representatives in the public body, our duties in this work group, on this commission, on council, are to respond to the needs of the public. And whenever this parking proposal, this amendment, was brought forth and Councilor Leach said, we need to examine this. We need to put the brakes on this. And there was that ask for putting the brakes, and the motion was put forth to take that to a work session. We saw a majority of our council willing to take that to a work session and say, we're gonna work on this. And for it to go to a work session and for no substantial changes to occur after we had an overwhelming amount of individuals come and provide personal narrative about their lived experience surviving in their vehicles and using vehicles for stabilization during episodes of homelessness. I fear that those concerns expressed by the public were not taken seriously, and were not acknowledged by city councilors who sat there and listened to those testimonies. I mean, we had members of our public at the city of Eugene walk up and say, living in my vehicle saved my life and prevented me from the experience of unsheltered homelessness. In a public hearing, in a public setting, those people coming forward and being vulnerable about their experience, their lived experience with homelessness, and for folks to not acknowledge that and to not say, let's take the time to examine this policy and modify it, sends a lot of red flags and a lot of question marks about whether this population is being taken seriously, and those members of the public that came forth and provided testimony through the public process were being taken seriously. And for folks that haven't watched that city council session, I recommend you taking the time to listen to all the members of the public that went up there and talked about their experience of living in a vehicle, and just soak it in and think about how that wasn't acted on and that wasn't changed. I think that there's a grave travesty in not validating those individuals and their willingness to show up to a meeting and be vulnerable. I'm deeply saddened by that. This question about cost came up, and I want to just segue into that conversation about cost with some figures that I have that I can share with you. And then after I do so, Richard, I'm going to call on you. I just want to share these figures since Julia, you had really cued in on being interested in those figures. So there's a report produced. There's a couple reports produced by Legal Aid Services and Oregon Law Center. These ones in particular were put forth by the Oregon Law Center. So street storage on street, Eugene Code 5135, Section 1, 929 cases were filed, 43,420 worth of fines were imposed. 84% of the fines were unpaid, and more than a third have gone to collections. Camping, EC 41815, 66 cases were filed, $11,112 in fines were imposed. 99% of fines are unpaid, and more than half have gone to collections. Unlawful use of public way, EC 4.830, 47 cases were filed, $5,742 of fines were imposed. 100% of fines are unpaid, and almost half have gone to collections. This being under Eugene Municipal Court data from a 23-month period, 22 to 2023. So what we're looking at is that these fines do not get paid. Folks who are experiencing poverty or homelessness who are given fines do not have the capacity to pay them. And we have staff and administrative costs of administering fines and filing them and going through this process. This isn't a source of revenue. An overwhelming majority of these fines are not paid, and it is a significant amount of administrative cost, and a significant amount of times spent by City of Eugene staff. There is a plethora of information provided in this document, and I'll reach out and see if I can get a comprehensive and more updated document that displays that this is a significant administrative cost, and that citations, fines, and impoundment are not effective manners for even managing a crisis of homelessness and housing. The enforcement doesn't even work. This isn't something that is stimulating the city. It's not something that is providing revenue. We're administering citations and fees and then destroying people's credit when those citations and fees go unpaid and sent to collections. And then those individuals come to social service providers and have to rely on public dollars to shelter them and to provide navigation services for them while they stabilize. And if your credit is destroyed because a citation went to collections, it is very difficult to access private sector housing. And this is a reality that is not being taken into consideration. If you want someone to access housing, you cannot destroy their credit while they are unhoused. And so those figures alone as a service provider are very overwhelming, and we're using precious resources in service navigation, case management, and diversion to help someone navigate barriers produced by our current process of enforcement and municipal management. It does not make sense. It is not effective. And it is not an effective way for us to use our precious time that could be more so focused on helping someone navigate the barriers of housing and homelessness. And I just want to provide those figures, Julie, to what you had expressed, because I think just seeing those numbers alone and the percentage of fines that go unpaid it's so significant, and it is so important that we recognize that this is not working. This is not a strategy that is working, and there's documented evidence of this. And we have members of the public that are coming in and they're saying this would harm me, but yet we're still passing policy that actively harms individuals in our community. And those decisions are being made consciously with a vote on policy. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that. So I'll yield and turn the floor over to Richard. And if anyone else has comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
So who are you going to listen to if you're the mayor, a council person on the city council, a commissioner? And there's exceptions to this rule. But who are you going to listen to when it comes to this? The HRC or the man who has all the gold, who makes the rules? I'm sorry, but that's how it goes here. The political will to do anything different, that's very dark. I understand that's hard to understand, to get over, but that's what's happening here. We're not getting anywhere because there's no political will to do it, and those who have the gold make the rules. We've got to get past that somehow by making sure that people understand that their gold is getting taken by making these rules. I yield.
Julie?
Appreciate that, Richard. Yeah, thank you, Blake. I know it's hard because, like, when we look at unhoused folks and we think about, who gets to be seen and heard, at the political level, unhoused folks are still constituents. There are ways for unhoused folks to access, the voting thing. The only problem is that we don't have, that momentum. It would be hard. I understand that, but it's also, requires outreach and momentum. And I was just like delivering ballots today to folks. And so, yeah, I just hear that and I yield.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jolene. And I think that that's something that as we look at a crisis of housing and homelessness in our community, this is actually a very large percentage of constituents, and it's growing. Although unsheltered populations only make up the small portion I've heard referenced in city council meetings before. It's 2 to 3% of our population. In a city of 200,000 people, it's a large percentage of our population, and that's only the individuals that are currently experiencing homelessness. This policy impacts so many renters and low-income households, that might be impacted by it. And I really appreciated what you said about unhoused folks being constituents. It's a really important voice to listen to, and it's a voice, it's a demographic that's growing. It's becoming more common for folks to have these experiences.
As an enrolled tribal member, an indigenous person, we make up about 1%, they say, of the US population. However, you did see in some of the last elections around how when you do have that much, that many constituents, you can influence the outcomes of different elections. So if the unhoused population is around 3%, and Indigenous Native Americans were about 1%, just think about how many lost opportunities there are for unhoused folks to have a voice in our democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Jolene. So I think looking at this, I want to say that our work group did a lot of work here to collaborate and put forth ideas and recommendations. And this is a policy that it's passed, it's active in our community. I think a lot of us are going to feel the impacts of it. I know that there are going to be organizations that are impacted, and it's going to put stress on our already very stressed and spread thin crisis response system. And I hear around the room that we have the interest in producing the statement, and this is something that we can talk about, Cynthia, avenues that we take this from the Human Rights Commission, and see if we can get this passed along to City Council, and probably go in a forum where they're making sure that there's a discussion around this. This might be something that we take and read at a council meeting. So folks in this group are interested in collaborating on this statement. I think keeping it concise and really realistic, and discussing the direct and disparate impact that this has. If anyone's interested in collaborating on it, and talking about our participation in the process and our opinions and thoughts about the outcome, just reach out to me, and we'll put together some time as a working group to collaborate on that statement and put it forth to the commission. Because I totally agree, Jolene, is we have a population of folks that need representation. And we're in a position where we can provide, we have an opportunity to provide insight into our thoughts and experiences on issues. So I appreciate what you said. And Richard, I want to recognize your hand.
Thank you. I know we're not going to get it from the city, so are we going to reach out to any of these business owners of tow companies to find out the cost of how much something like that, what they get from the city to do all this every time they move somebody 2 blocks? Because I know the city is going to be reluctant, like they always are, to give us anything. So are we going to reach out to the tow companies to get it? And as this meeting's wrapping up again, I'd remind people to help yourself by helping somebody else.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So one thing that we can do, looking at the cost, I think even a profound angle is looking at that impact, that qualitative narrative that you've shared about the tow truck driver, questioning the efficacy of the model that they're being contracted to participate in. We have the jurisdiction under our current work plan to reach out to contractors with the city of Eugene. And so we could identify and ask for those organizations, what those organizations that are contracted, who they are, and to see if they'd like to provide comment. So I can send that message internally to see if we can get a list of those contractors and turn that wheel.
And I'm reaching out, so I'd be glad to be a part of whatever this statement is going to end up being.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So if anyone else has interest in providing the statement, please feel free to do so. And I'll put together an email of folks that are interested, and we'll get something produced for our next meeting, so that we can share that. So thank you all for that, all of you that participated in that process. We'll have a conversation with council and see what we can do moving forward, and see what this impact looks like. So that is, we have successfully gone through our agenda for this evening. So if anyone doesn't have any comments on the parking conversation, I think we can just move on. We'll move on to our kind of closing comments and hold some space for public comment at the end of this meeting. Does that work for y'all? High fives.
Yay.
Julia, you're our high fiber of the evening. Thank you. So moving into this last section, if there are any any participants that have comment, we can provide some time for public comment. We won't be deliberating on comments, but we want to just provide the space, some familiar faces in the audience. But if you do, just raise your hand, and I'll promote your position so you're allowed to talk. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking in this genre, you can feel free to shoot an email to connect with us. And if you would have interest in getting involved in our work group, we're currently asking folks to join. And so we're in that phase of recruitment. So you can shoot an email and I'll send you the link to apply to be on our work group. So I'm not seeing any hands from attendees. Jetty, I
Come
see a
on,
hand
Jenny.
for public comment. Jetty, okay, I'm going to allow you to speak. We'll keep public comment about 3 minutes so that we can hold time and stay true to our 7:30 this evening. So Jetty, you're allowed to speak.
Okay, thank you for giving me time. I would like to work with you guys. I know a lot of people out there. Like Richard said, I've gone out and camped with them. I have some of them are like, I have some really, really great friends out there. So I know the people on a very personal level. And like I said, I'm their megaphone, and I can help get their words out to you guys. I know a lot of people that will be affected by Johnson versus Grants Pass. So I have a lot of things that I've been, trying to figure out how we can help the people out on the streets if that is passed. And the parking ban, I know a lot of people that are already being affected by the parking ban, and that will be in the future. And there's a lot of things to like think about when it comes to their things getting towed. A lot of them don't have legitimate tags, or their vehicles don't run, or there's a lot of like deals that happen over there, and to transfer titles costs money, and IDs, a lot of people don't have IDs out there. So it's not just a matter of getting the money to get their things out of the impound. Like when their vehicles enter impound, it's most likely never coming out, and that's just their reality. What else was I wrote some notes down, so I just also wanted to comment on the voting. Like a lot of people that are living out on the streets, a lot of them do have felonies, which means they can't vote or they don't have IDs. So it's like they really do have a hard time participating in having a voice in what's going on in our city. And I just think that's something to remember. But I think you guys are doing really great work, and I'm excited to have any future conversations with you guys. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jetty. And I'll make sure you get the information for joining our work group. We'd love to have you on board. So thanks for being here this evening. Scott, John Q, either of you two have anything to share? It's always good to see you, John. Okay. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for this evening's discussion. So our items that we're really working on are going to be moving forward in our work on the protected class project. Jackie and I have had some conversation. Cynthia and I have had some conversation about what we can do as a working group to move forward on that project and get a solid recommendation down. So this will be a conversation at the upcoming Human Rights Commission meeting for the three of us to discuss about some of what our work group has had around that protected class recommendation, and some avenues that we would like to take. So if you can tune into our next HRC meeting, you'll hear our take on this, and then some of our action items for the working group and our follow-up with Lori. For folks who expressed interest in collaboration on the statement, we will I will reach out to you. So I've got Richard. If anyone else does, just shoot me an email. I'll get you involved in that parking conversation. And as a general note, just as Jetty came this evening, if anyone has any connections or folks in the community that you think would be interested in joining our work group and engaging in this discussion, this is really a time for us to come together talk about issues happening and impacting folks experiencing homelessness in the city of Eugene. So if there's someone that you think should come and be a guest speaker or participate in this dialogue, reach out to me. We will slate them on the agenda. We'll have a discussion. We'll entertain avenues for how we might engage and provide support in the same way that we had that conversation this evening. So never hesitate to reach out to me. If you can reach out to me the Friday prior to our meeting, that'll make sure that it's reflected in the agenda, and that we make sure that the agenda that we turn into the city reflects what we're going to be doing in the evening. So just always feel free to shoot me that note the Friday prior. So we're looking at that first Tuesday of the month as our solid meeting time from 5 to 7:30. So just that Friday before the first Tuesday of the month, just shoot me a message if you have any agenda items you want discussed. Jolene, I see your hand, and then we'll close out after your comment.
Yeah, sorry about that. So can felons vote in Oregon? You generally lose the right to vote in Oregon while incarcerated if you're convicted of a felony. If you're on parole, probation, or have fully completed your sentence, you may register to vote and cast a ballot. I believe our places like there are websites if you go on there and research about how to register on house folks to vote and things like that. That information is available. So yeah, if anyone did want to encourage unhoused folks to participate in that process, I think it's definitely worthwhile.
Thanks, Jolene. If you would send me any of those resources, I've run some clinics for that before. I'd love to start getting folks enrolled in programs that I steward to have access to those resources and get registered if they're not. That's Freddie and Sarah had provided some resources on that last year through the League of Women Voters, some of their work. So if you have any fresh resources on that, just send them my way. I appreciate that. And Richard, I see your hand.
I'm just going to close this out with an odd story. Police in Michigan, I forget which city, noticed a electrical cord coming from a place on the roof into a sign for the Fairway Village Square Shopping Center. And they noticed an odd cord there, so they followed the cord, and inside the sign of this shopping center was a homeless person living inside the sign. She had enough room there for a computer, a coffee maker, and a printer. And upon being found out, she had confessed to living there for a year. Reason I bring this up is what a horrible thing, because the lack of affordable housing, which they recognized in the city in Michigan, and they used the utmost care and professionalism and compassion to deal with this lady who volunteered to leave and no charges were pressed. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, and I appreciate those notes, and it's refreshing to hear an approach to homelessness that seems like it was handled and supporting someone. So yeah, I always appreciate your positive notes to end our meetings, which sometimes do have a little bit of a weight to them. Julie, I saw that you unmuted. Did you have a comment before we close out this evening?
No, that was my cat, but thank you.
No problem. Well, I'm glad that we have a little participant with us. Our four-legged friends are always welcome at these meetings. So I'll be following up with a couple of you individually. If you can, tune into our commission meeting next week on Tuesday. It'll be via Zoom. So, if you want to tune in, just reach out. We'll make sure that you have a link to that, and you can participate as an attendee, provide comment should you so choose. So thanks, y'all, for being here, and thanks as always for a really great conversation. And we'll start chipping away at some of these action items. We've had a really productive spring, and I'm excited to see what we can do to push the needle day by day as a group and see if we can get anything through to council that helps our peeps out there. So appreciate you all. Have a great evening, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your
Thank
input.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
And shout out to Jackie for kicking us off. Appreciate you.
Thank you. See you next Tuesday.
Thank you all.